There is an uncomfortable truth about everyday life in Britain not so very long ago, and it is one we tend to avoid because it clashes with everything we have been taught about progress, comfort, and modern living. Despite the smoking, despite the rationing, despite the medicine that would make modern doctors wince, many ordinary people in Britain were, by most measurable standards, healthier than we are today. Obesity was rare. Type 2 diabetes barely registered. Heart disease existed, but not at the scale we now accept as normal. And the most unsettling part is this: they were not trying to be healthy. There were no fitness plans, no calorie apps, no wellness influencers, and no one talking about optimization or longevity. The habits that shaped their bodies were not deliberate choices. They were simply the way life worked. So let's step back into that everyday world, not to romanticize it, and certainly not to suggest we should return to it wholesale, but to understand how ordinary British habits once shaped health quietly, unintentionally, and without anyone thinking twice about it. Number 1. Walking was how you got anywhere. In much of Britain, especially through the 1940s, 50s, and early 60s, walking was not an activity you scheduled. It was not something you did in special shoes or logged in a notebook. It was simply how you moved through the world. Children walked to school, often in all weather, sometimes several miles a day. Mothers walked to the shops, carrying baskets or bags that grew heavier on the return journey. Fathers walked to work or to the bus stop, and if they missed the bus, they walked the rest of the way without complaint. The idea of driving a short distance that could be covered on foot would have seemed wasteful, even faintly absurd. Over time, these small journeys accumulated into miles of daily movement, woven so tightly into life that no one noticed they were doing it. Number 2. Cycling was transport, not a lifestyle. Alongside walking, the bicycle was everywhere. Not as a symbol of fitness or leisure, but as a practical solution to distance. Men cycled to factories in jackets and caps. Women cycled to offices in skirts and sensible shoes. Children cycled to school with satchels bumping against their backs. Even shop deliveries were made by bicycle, crates strapped carefully to the frame. Cycle racks were common because everyone needed somewhere to leave their bike. There was nothing remarkable about arriving slightly out of breath. It simply meant you had got there under your own power. As cars became more affordable, cycling faded quietly from daily life, replaced not with another form of movement, but with sitting. And with that change, thousands of unconscious pedal strokes disappeared from the average day. Number 3. Plates were smaller, and so were portions. If you look closely at old British crockery, one thing stands out almost immediately. The plates are noticeably smaller. A standard dinner plate in the mid-20th century measured around 8 or 9 inches across. By modern standards, it looks almost like a side plate. Yet meals served on those plates were considered filling, even generous. As plates grew larger over time, portions expanded with them. Not because appetites changed, but because the surface allowed it. This quiet psychological shift happened without discussion, without planning, and without anyone noticing it was happening at all. Number 4. Every meal was cooked from scratch. In many British homes, cooking was unavoidable. There were no microwaves, refrigerators were rare, and freezers almost unheard of. Ready meals did not exist, and takeaway was an occasional novelty rather than a default option. This meant that food had to be prepared daily, often from ingredients bought that same morning. Vegetables were peeled, meat was prepared, pastry was made by hand. The process was time-consuming and physical, involving standing, lifting, chopping, and stirring. Meals were simpler as a result. Not because people wanted simplicity, but because elaborate, calorie-dense dishes required time and money most households did not have. Meat, potatoes, and vegetables formed the backbone of most dinners with little in the way of excess. Number 5. Meals had fixed times, and snacking was discouraged. Eating followed a structure that was rarely questioned. Breakfast, dinner, and tea happened at roughly the same times each day. Outside of that, food was limited. Snacking was not encouraged and was often seen as poor self-control or unnecessary indulgence. Biscuits were for specific moments, not something you reached for whenever boredom struck. Food cost money, and wasting it on constant nibbling made little sense. As a result, the body learned long gaps between meals, and hunger was treated as something to be endured until the next proper sitting. Number 6. Housework was physical labor. Running a home required a surprising amount of physical effort. Without washing machines, laundry involved scrubbing, wringing, lifting, and hanging heavy wet fabric by hand. Without vacuum cleaners, carpets were beaten and swept manually. Coal fires needed tending. Floors were scrubbed on hands and knees, often with cold water. This work was not recognized as exercise, but it kept bodies moving for hours each day. The average housewife covered miles of movement simply maintaining the household, burning calories steadily without ever thinking about it. Number 7. Homes were cold and bodies adapted. Central heating was not the norm. In many houses, only the front room was heated, often by a single coal fire. Bedrooms were cold, bathrooms colder still, and winter mornings began with visible breath in the air. Hot water bottles were a necessity. Layers of clothing were worn indoors, and the body worked constantly to maintain warmth. Modern studies suggest that this regular exposure to cooler environments encouraged the body to burn more energy simply to stay warm. At the time, it was not a health strategy. It was simply how houses were. Number 8. Stairs were unavoidable. Lifts existed, but most people rarely used them. Homes had stairs, shops had stairs, offices had stairs, and unless you were elderly or unwell, you climbed them. Choosing the lift over the stairs could be seen as lazy or indulgent. As a result, leg strength, balance, and cardiovascular fitness were maintained through repeated, ordinary effort. Today, many of those staircases have been replaced with escalators and lifts, and we now pay to replicate the same movement in gyms. Number 9. Meals were eaten together at a table. Televisions were rare, especially in the early post-war years, and meals were social events. Families gathered at the table, food was served, and eating happened with conversation rather than distraction. When the meal ended, eating stopped. There was a clear beginning and end, reinforced by routine and shared expectation. This structure made overeating less likely, not through discipline, but through rhythm. Food was part of the day, not something consumed continuously in the background. Number 10. Sugar was visible. People in Britain certainly ate sugar, but they knew when they were doing it. Sugar went into tea, onto bread as jam, or appeared in puddings on specific days. It was measured, visible, and obvious. Today, much of the sugar we consume is concealed inside products that do not register as sweet, altering intake without conscious awareness. That quiet shift has had consequences no one intended. Number 11. Food was seasonal by default. What you ate depended heavily on the time of year. Strawberries appeared briefly and vanished. Apples followed the seasons. Vegetables arrived when they were ready and disappeared when they were not. This natural limitation created variation in diet without planning. It also meant food was fresher, spoiled faster, and could not be stockpiled indefinitely. Buying only what you needed for the next day or two prevented overconsumption simply because excess food rarely survived long enough to be eaten. Number 12. Meat was eaten sparingly. For many families, meat was expensive and treated accordingly. Portions were smaller. Meals were bulked out with vegetables, oats, and potatoes, and meat appeared as part of a dish rather than its center. Sunday roasts were special precisely because they were not everyday occurrences. This pattern resulted in diets that were unintentionally lower in saturated fat and calories than modern equivalents. No one described this as restraint. It was simply how budgets and availability shaped meals. Number 13. Sleep followed daylight. Evenings were quieter. Without screens in every room, entertainment was limited. Families listened to the wireless, read, or talked before going to bed. Children were often asleep by early evening, and adults followed not long after. 8 hours of sleep was common, not because it was recommended, but because there was little reason to stay awake. Adequate sleep supported appetite regulation and energy balance without anyone labeling it as such. Number 14. Choices were limited. Perhaps one of the most overlooked factors was the lack of constant choice. Supermarkets were smaller, options were fewer, temptation was less frequent. This reduced the mental effort required to make decisions about food, activity, and routine. With fewer choices, habits formed naturally and stuck. Modern life presents endless options, many of them designed to encourage excess. Earlier generations simply did not have that burden. Number 15. Nobody tried to be healthy. This is where everything comes together. There were no programs, no goals, no sense of self-improvement. People lived within the constraints of their environment, and those constraints shaped bodies quietly and consistently. Health was not pursued. It was a byproduct of daily life. And when those ordinary habits disappeared, replaced by convenience, comfort, and abundance, the unintended benefits disappeared with them. Looking back, this is not an argument for returning to harder lives or colder homes. It is simply a reminder that health was once woven into everyday existence in ways we barely noticed. Perhaps the most important question is not which habits we should bring back, but which ones we lost without ever realizing what they were giving us. Which of these ordinary habits do you remember most clearly?